Ever wonder what it really takes to build a business and a life that feels like yours? Welcome to That Big CEO Energy. I'm Callie, entrepreneur, operations whiz, and your go-to for the real, raw, and unfiltered side of business and life. Hey, welcome back to the show. Today's conversation is going to be a little bit different. But honestly, I think some of you and me desperately need it because I want to talk about hobbies. Real hobbies. Not side hustles that are disguised as hobbies. We know what those are. Sourdough baking for me. Not productive downtime. Not something you can monetize in 6 months. I'm actually talking about the things that purely make us feel alive again. And I know there's somebody that is listening and already thinking to themselves, like, Kelly, I barely have time to shower and answer emails. What do you mean hobbies? I know. But I also think that's exactly the problem. Because somewhere along the way, especially as entrepreneurs and high capacity women, we stopped letting ourselves exist out of productivity. Right? Everything has become output. Everything has become optimization. And eventually, probably, I know I have woken up one day and realized, like, my entire personality has become responsibilities. And don't get me wrong, I love ambition. I love building businesses. Like, that is my jam. And I love growth too, but I also know that a creatively starved human being cannot sustainably lead a business. You just can't. Because eventually your brain gets tired of only producing. And that's where we have a lot of fatigue. And eventually your nervous system gets tired of only carrying responsibility. And then your creativity starts begging for another outlet. And honestly, I think some of the burnout people are experiencing right now isn't because they're working too much. I think it's because they've stopped experiencing life outside of work altogether. And I think it's one of the saddest things about adulthood, how quickly we stop playing. Think about it. When we are in grade school, when we're in elementary school, when we're even in high school, like, most of our days are just filled with going to school, playing. There's no worries. There's no bills. Even when you start to work, maybe when you were a kid, you were, 14, 15 when you got your first job. I was almost 15, 14 and 9 months, but I still did fun things. And kids do things because they're curious, right? And adults tend to do things because they're useful. And if something isn't useful, what happens? We struggle to justify it. We struggle to make sense of why it gets to fit in our life. And hello, like, I take bread, for example. I couldn't just bake bread because it feels good, grounding and being satisfied. It had to become content. It had to become a business. It had to become a side hustle. That's just what it was. You can't just, go on a walk. Now it has to count towards steps or being productive or mindset work. Maybe you're listening to a book while you're out on the walk. And I think, social media has made this even worse now because every hobby feels monetizable. Every passion feels marketable. Everything feels like we should be doing something or become something. But some things are allowed to just exist simply because they bring you joy. And honestly, I think we need more of that. And hobbies matter especially when you're an entrepreneur. Because I think entrepreneurs especially struggle with our brains that are consistently having to problem solve, right? Decision making, creating, strategizing, managing, leading, like we're the marketing person, we are the admin, we have to have control over our finances, we have to make strategic decisions, we are the janitor, we are the social media, we are all of these things. And so we're always quote unquote on. And eventually what happens is our creativity starts drying up because it literally has nowhere else to go when we're so obsessed with doing all of these other things. And this is exactly why some of our best hobbies happen when we're in the shower or on a walk or while we're baking or doing something with our hands or while we're driving or gardening, while literally doing anything except staring at your laptop and trying to force brilliance. Because creativity needs movement, it needs novelty, it needs space, and hobbies give your brain something completely different when it comes to stimulation. It's not to perform, it's not to yield a result, but it's rather this creative stimulation, which is also human stimulation. And so I want to talk today a little bit about like maybe some hobbies that we could try, not because I think that everyone needs to suddenly become deeply interesting overnight, but really because I think that some of you genuinely forgot that you're allowed to explore things. And I remember when I went to Daniela's graduation, and this was so humbling because I had him as a teacher, and I can't quite remember his last name now, but he was talking about how he has this collection, and his collection is still very interesting to him, and it still very much is a hobby. And it was like a silly collection of like cars or something, but he was talking about how you don't have to give away the part of you that's still a kid, the part of you that wants to explore. And I teared up listening to that because how rich that is, not only for the kids that were hearing it during that time, right? Like as they're stepping out into adulthood, they're hearing these words of don't forget about the kid inside of you, but also for the parents, that some of those parents, that's their youngest child or that's their only child. And so they're having to step into this place of, oh yeah, like I do want to explore things. And I do remember that I had a hobby one time, and maybe I lost that part of me when I was parenting because sometimes you had to, right? Like sometimes you have to set that part of your life aside while you're parenting, especially if you're a single parent, And sometimes you just forget. You literally just forget that like you had hobbies and you were a whole person at one time outside of whatever your title was, a mom or a dad or whatever. But I think we also have to remember that just because we're a parent, just because we're an adult, just because we have this expectation from society to have it all together, I think we forget that when we go to try something, whether it's new or, like me, for instance, for my clarinet, I think we forget that we're allowed to either come back to those things or try new things. We're allowed to do that badly, right? Like we don't have to, because kids, right? Like when they try something, they're not like a superstar on the first day that they show up in a uniform with cleats on, like I think about when Daniela played soccer, and I joke about it still because we live in a town that they do soccer on Mother's Day weekend, and it is like a big deal. Like 175 teams come from all over the state, and it is this huge thing, and we don't even drive on that side of town for that weekend. But when we think about the kids, like they're all, I don't know, most of them are like middle school age or whatever. So like the middle school, like if you've ever watched middle school kids play soccer, it's like a little beehive that follows the ball around because it's just bad. Like it's just nobody has it together. Nobody knows what they're doing. You've got one kid that has the ball and all the other players, including the other team, are just like following it around and they're just trying to get it to the goal. And and then as soccer progresses, right, and you watch it, if you watch it when it's like pro level, everybody's spaced out. Everybody is locked in. Everybody knows exactly, they know what their role on the field is. They know who they can pass it to, when they need to pass it. And it's like any sport, right? Like when you're kids, you're just bad. You're just really bad at it. But it's because they're new at something. And so I think as adults, we forget that we're allowed to be new at something too. We're allowed to try things and be really bad at it. And honestly, it's such a freeing part of trying something new, and it's such a part of healing that if you just allow it to exist in your life, that it comes back to you tenfold. And if we're constantly overthinking or constantly, quote unquote, mentally on, you probably need hobbies that get you into your body and out of your brain. Things like walking, things like hiking, gardening, right? Dance classes, maybe an adult sports league, pottery even. And it's kind of like me where I garden, I read, I should say, yeah, I'm going to say that I garden now because I have a little garden and it's actually doing really well, you guys. And I thought I had a black thumb and I would always joke about it. And the truth is I didn't do enough research to know what I was doing. Anyway, so I do that and then I teach bar class. And it gets me, and I run, right? So like it gets me into my body and out of my brain where it just becomes where I am taking up space. And I'm doing things that I like. And I know some people will hear things like gardening and immediately think like, oh my gosh, that sounds so boring. But honestly, there is something, whether it's gardening, whether it's pottery, there's something deeply grounding about working with your hands and being connected to something physical instead of digital, right? Where like you can't rush it. You can't rush pottery. You can't rush gardening. You can't multitask pottery or gardening. You have to be present. And I think that presence is something, especially in this digital age, especially with being adults, we have lost. And so if you've been feeling creatively blocked in your business, I want you to hear me carefully. You probably don't need another content strategy. That is something that you do not need. I can assure you. You need creative expansion. And this is where hobbies like photography, painting, maybe embroidery, calligraphy, music even, cake decorating, or even like cooking through a cookbook can become really powerful because creativity feeds creativity. And when you start to make things happen again and start to make things that bring you joy again, not for money, not for performance, but just because it feels good, there is something, you guys, that literally wakes up inside of you. And it's the most incredible, incredible feeling. And I think that hobbies can reconnect people to community in such a beautiful way. And honestly, adult loneliness is a real thing. Even when you have a family, even when you have a spouse. But a lot of people work from home nowadays. They parent from home. They live online and they're so isolated without even realizing it. To where things like book clubs, volunteering, community theater, sports leagues, dance classes, right? Like live music events can become super, super important. And it's not because you've become like this, all of a sudden you're this wildly social person, but because humans need connection, real connection. And not just in comment sections and, DMs and, hearting everybody else's stuff. It literally is real connection. And for the person that sort of like lost their sense of wonder, this one kind of hit me hard when I was thinking about this episode. What it must feel like to have lost wonder. And I lost wonder for a long time. I knew through therapy and through help, I knew that Daniela was going to graduate. And this is going to be super emotional. I was really scared because I had been a mom since I was 20 years old, and that was all I knew. That's all I knew. I knew how to be a mom. I knew how to go to school for 21 credit hours and get a college degree. I knew how to work. Even when I married Chris and we had, kids in the home who needed us more attentively, that was my job. That was who I had become. And I lost my sense of wonder. I lost what it felt like to be creative. Everything felt heavy. Everything felt really serious. Everything felt urgent. And what I had missed was hobbies that I was doing before all of that in life had happened, which is not a bad thing at all. But I had no curiosity. I didn't even want to know what it was like to collect something random. I don't have knickknacks in my house. Like I don't, right? Like just using that as or even relearning the clarinet. Like I thought that part of me had just been gone because I grew up, because I became a mom, because I had shifted my whole entire identity into something that I was doing. And when I started making sourdough, I think that was my very first time of starting to really explore something with my hands, little things, right? Maybe it's making pasta from scratch. Maybe it's learning an instrument. It's these little things that reconnect you to the part of yourself that still wants to explore life. And I think that matters way more than we realize, because when life becomes the only responsibility that we have, you slowly stop feeling alive inside of it. And I need to say this because I know that somebody is listening is already talking themselves out of trying something. You don't need to be good at your hobby. You don't need to monetize it. You don't need to become exceptional at it, right? The point is not mastery. The point is expansion. The point is enjoyment. The point is reconnecting with yourself outside of achieving. And honestly, I think that high achieving women especially need spaces where they're allowed to be imperfect. They're allowed to be beginners. They're allowed to do something simply because it's fun. And yes, ironically, your business benefits too, because inspired people create differently. Rested people think differently. And creative people solve problems differently. When your whole identity is wrapped up in work, eventually your creativity narrows. But when you've had experiences outside of work, you expand, right? You bring a new perspective back into your leadership, not because you forced it to, but because you lived. So if you need a permission slip, here it is. Go try something. Something messy. Something awkward. Something completely unnecessary. Take the dance class. Go take adult ballet. Yeah, that's a real thing. I just learned about that. Learn the instruments. Plant the garden. Join a book club. Join a podcast club. More to come on that. Bake the bread. Take the walk. And don't turn it into content immediately. Don't turn it into a business immediately. Let it belong to you first. Let it sink into your soul. Let it become a part of who you are. Because your business does not deserve every ounce of your humanity. You are allowed to keep parts of yourself just for yourself. So here's what I want you to think about after today. What lights you up outside of your productivity? And if you don't know, I want you to get out a piece of paper and a pen, and you know what I'm going to say. Journal, girl. But what lights you up outside of your productivity? Not what impresses people, not what makes you money, not what makes you look successful, what genuinely makes you feel alive. And if you don't know the answer right now, that's okay. Maybe your next hobby, just throwing this out there, but maybe your next hobby is just simply rediscovering yourself. I'll see you in the next episode.